Yeah.
Do you think there's a normalization of stress now that people aren't prioritizing it because, oh, it's just stress, we're all stressed, like, why am I making a fuss, sort of like just dismiss it in a way?
Yes, and they can ride through it. And that's the thing, is we could stay at a certain level of being able to push through it and manage for years on end until it becomes almost like the last straw on the camel's back and something extra happens. And then we talk about adrenal fatigue and adrenal exhaustion. So there is a point where people can keep going for quite a long time until something extra. And often people say to me in clinic that they've been through something like a sudden bereavement and they've managed the funeral and they've kept themselves going, and as soon as the event stops, they collapse.
Hello, welcome in to another edition of Chi Time, your conscious living show with me, Clara Apollo, here on UK Health Radio, on podcast and on YouTube if you're watching this on video. We will be playing some music later on in the show, and it won't be available on the podcast or YouTube, but you'll be able to hear it if you're on UK Health Radio. So those practicals over with now. I am absolutely thrilled to invite into the show a woman who has been studying nutrition and particularly around women's health. I'm talking about Dr. Marilyn Glenville is in the Chi Time hot seat, and it's a complete honour that she is here to share with us her wisdom and the new research coming through and practical tips to help you overcome the stress or at least reduce it in your life. So the UK's top nutritional scientist, I believe, Dr. Marilyn Glenville, welcome to Chi Time.
Hello, Clara. Lovely to be invited on.
Oh, it's an absolute thrill. Really. I'm trying to stay calm. But yes, so stress is indeed, I think most people we know have got some form of stress going on in their lives, haven't they?
They have, and the Mental Health Foundation recently said 74% of people are so stressed they feel actually overwhelmed and not able to cope. And about 60% of those are also very anxious with it. So there can be this mix of stress and anxiety, feeling of panic, and feeling really not able to manage, not coping well generally. And it's quite sad to see that, and also in the younger generations as well.
Well, there's a lot of pressure on people these days. I mean, with the erosion of Sunday being our day off, let alone Wednesday afternoons used to be as well, didn't it? And it's incessant sort of wanting to do things. I mean, this is an exciting world that we live in, and we do want to get involved with things, but there's only a finite amount of time and an infinite amount of things to do. So what can you suggest for people around being able to help themselves sort of reframe how they manage their lives?
Yes, and it is a tricky one because we have this 24/7 technology now, as we didn't have before. So there is that pressure to be in touch with everybody. There are people on social media. It's that feeling of fear of not missing out. So it is that constant pressure all the time. And somehow we have to take that time back. I can give you practical tips on what we do nutritionally as well, but it is also about a routine and time management and putting boundaries there that maybe people haven't got at the moment. And so there's no space like they would have had Sunday or Wednesday afternoon. There isn't that space because it could be 24/7 shopping, ordering food. There aren't the boundaries that are being set by society. We've almost got to set that space and time ourselves.
Yeah, really. We've got to learn to say no more often.
Yes.
But
yes.
I'm going to pick you up on one of the things you just mentioned there about getting food and stuff, because when your time is eroded, you tend not to spend as much time cooking the nutritional, healthy meals. And do you think that the rise of sort of fast food and ready meals has really brought the nation's nutritional quotient sort of down?
Yes, definitely. And it is this eating on the run. We're trying to fit in more things within the time. And a couple of things that will go will actually be eating and not sitting down and eating properly, or not sitting down as a family, and then sleep. It's how we try and expand that time, and what we leave out or skimp on or eat on the move or not have the hours that we would normally do, because we're pushing more into the evening and thinking, oh, well, we could get away with less sleep. But actually all those things we can't get away with without eating well and looking after ourselves and recharging our batteries. It is really important.
It is. So we can talk about all this and people know it. I mean, how many of you listening out there are watching, you know this stuff, but how do we actually do something about it that's practical for us, that can make sense, that we can actually fit into our everyday lives?
I think also that many people don't realise that their pattern of eating can actually be making them feel more stressed than the stress that's coming in from external, with financial, work, relationships. We will all have those stresses, but what we eat and how we eat can actually be releasing the same stress hormones that are being released because of the pressures outside. And all the time with stress, we're thinking, what can we control? And certain things we won't be able to because of pressures at work that make it difficult. But definitely our pattern of eating, we could start to make changes that are going to enable us to feel less stressed and more able to cope and easier to make decisions.
That's so true. I've about a year ago, I had problems with inflammation in my stomach, and I think it was, I had been home free for 5 years. I've just recently got a home. Yay! It's made a huge difference on so many levels. But this thing about my stomach, you know, I was eating little and often because I wanted to keep my blood sugar steady. But actually, when I went to my acupuncturist, he said to me that physiologically, the stomach needs to also empty to be able to clean itself up and do its processing. And he said you should really have like about 4 hours between each of your meals. Is this something that you agree with?
I do. I normally go for 3, only because, and especially for women, that's when we would go into what I would call hypoglycemia and low blood sugar. So we do need a space, but it can't be too long, because when our blood sugar drops, then we will, and our body will release the stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, which are the same hormones that are going to be released because of stress outside. But it's also the quick fixes. So like the cup of tea and a biscuit, the chocolate bar, the energy drinks that people may be using to push themselves and go longer and keep going through the day. But those in themselves will cause that adrenal response to happen. And so they're going to feel more stressed, even though they think they're helping themselves. It's like having the foot on the accelerator of the car all the time. And in the end, over time, the engine will burn out. So there's always consequences, and how we are aiming to manage and reduce that stress and keep our energy going, but without it having a negative effect on our health.
Yeah, quite a few bits of, I'd like to pick you up on a couple. Keeping it level and steady, not dipping. So we want slow release carbohydrates. And
so the whole concept of having a low glycemic index diet, and the easiest way to think about that is if the food is whole, more in its natural state, and the fibers there, like porridge and brown rice and that sort of thing, it's not been refined, it's going to give us a longer lasting energy. And of course, fruit and vegetables, good quality protein, but it's taking away some of the refined food, the quick fixes like the added sugar, the caffeine, the energy drinks that are going in there that people may just be grabbing on the run to keep themselves going during the day.
I hear you, but I also know that people need to be able to grab stuff on the run. So what could you suggest that they could have instead of the sugary stuff?
So they'd almost be better if they're going for a sandwich. It would be wholemeal bread, even if they're buying it outside, and then either a protein like tuna if they eat fish, or they've got hummus or something in that. So you've got a protein, vegetable or animal, in with that slower releasing carbohydrates. On the run, they could do nuts and fruit, things like that, if they're grabbing something. So it's all about either for the snacks taking something with them, so they've almost got a stash, so they're never going to be without. But even nowadays, I know we've got fast food restaurants on every corner, but we do have really nice sandwich places where we can get a lunch on the run, but it's just a better quality choice that we're making at that point of buying that sandwich.
Absolutely. And I think it's overcoming old patterns, like when you used to go and buy something. I've noticed in a lot of the petrol stations and things now, they've got the nuts and the seeds up with the chocolate bars. I'm like, yes. And the
Yes.
naked
Yeah.
bars as well, you know, the dried fruits and the things that have
Yeah.
got sugar in them, but that sort of sugar's better for you. Is that right?
Yes, and if it's naturally contained within the food, like an apple, then it's absolutely fine. It's this added refined sugar that's going into not only our obvious sweet foods like our cakes and biscuits, but it's there now in things like tomato ketchup, salad dressing, baked beans, tomato sauces. So we've got this cumulative effect of all this added sugar during the day, unless people are diligent and reading the labels. It's creeping in everywhere.
Yeah, and reading the labels that are so small and tiny,
I
you've got to have
know.
your
Yeah.
specs on. Oh, I can't see them. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness! But it
Or
is
go
all.
to it, or go to a good health food shop and just make a
Of course.
switch of a brand that actually has not put the added sugar in the baked beans. There's loads of choices nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. So Dr. Marilyn Glenville is with us on She Time here, talking about stress and how food can really tip the balance there for you, as to if you're going to be having a lot of sudden stimulation like caffeine and sugar because you're reaching for something, you want some energy, you could actually be wiser to look beyond that. I love the idea of having a little stash of nuts like squirreled in your pockets, you know.
Or
I've
oat
always got my
cakes in
nuts.
your pocket.
Yeah, but sort of
Yeah.
thinking ahead, or at that point of sale, choosing as well, you know. And
Yes.
from a qigong perspective, I'd say hang on to your kidneys, you know,
Yes.
give energy to your kidneys. And you touched a little bit earlier on the adrenal response, and I would really love you to explain a little bit more about the whole cortisol thing
Yeah.
and why stress is actually really caustic for our systems biochemistrally.
So our adrenals are little organs sitting on top of the kidneys, and they are so important. They're our fight or flight organs. They save our life, and we need them. The difficulty nowadays, it's not that we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and all of that stress is going to be over in 5 minutes and we've run or we've fought for our life. It's this chronic stress. And with that, it means the adrenal glands are overworking all of the time. They're producing more adrenaline, more cortisol. People can end up with a lot of different symptoms that would seem completely unrelated. It could be muscle cramps, it could be fat around the middle, inflammation in the body, that could be in the joints, it could be going on digestively, there could be brain fog, irritability, anxiety. It affects our brain, it will affect our heart. If we think of every system in the body, reproductive organs as well, it's going to affect every system. It's that mechanism that it does that in order for us to run or fight for our life. And it is important when it's short-lived, but it's this day-to-day that then gives us all these aches and pains and bloating, recurrent infections, we're not sleeping, tiredness, there's just no energy at all. And over time then, it becomes harder and harder to function, and we need more and more quick fixes to keep going. And it then gives people's problems that they actually don't relate, even thinking about muscle cramps, they don't think them being related to stress, but they are, because our muscles have to contract in order for us to spring into action to run or fight. But somebody could be sitting in the office fielding phone calls, stuck on the motorway in a traffic jam. That contraction is happening, but we're not running anywhere at all. So they just feel constantly uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Like you say, running or shaking. After an animal has suddenly had to run for its life, if it's managed to save itself, of course, it will then be seen to shake. It will
Yes.
shake out the side effects of stress. Whereas if you're in the office and you're not actually doing any physical movement,
No.
Where is that going to go? It's going to go
Yes.
stay internal, which is not healthy.
No. And then it creates inflammation, it creates problems with fat storage, it's affecting then high cholesterol, it's affecting every system in the body, high blood pressure. And again, you think of high blood pressure, the body in that fight or flight situation has got to pump the blood to our extremities to save our life. Well, it would still be doing that even if they're stuck in a office sitting down or in a traffic jam. That pressure's going up, because the body thinks it's going to run or fight, but it's not going anywhere.
So, so a little bit shaking.
Yeah, and it's all this interconnection. Our bodies are so clever, and all of it's thinking of, there is a root cause sometimes, and that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, we're addressing these symptoms that seem completely unconnected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a normalization of stress now, that people aren't prioritizing it because, it's just stress, we're all stressed, like, why am I making a fuss, sort of like dismiss it in a way?
Yes, and they can ride through it. And that's the thing, is we could stay at a certain level of being able to push through it and manage for years on end, until it becomes almost like the last straw on the camel's back and something extra happens. And then we talk about adrenal fatigue and adrenal exhaustion. So there is a point where people can keep going for quite a long time until something extra. And often people say to me in clinic that they've been through something like a sudden bereavement, and they've managed the funeral and they've kept themselves going. And as soon as the event stops, they collapse. It's as if they are able to mobilize everything to get through that trauma until they feel it's finished, like after the funeral and everybody's gone home, and then complete collapse. It's the body just then lets go. And it's not comfortable then. It's how do we manage situations like that?
Absolutely. How do we manage that? I mean, that's an extreme example, but how many people they will do a whole run of work, and they'll know that if they have a few days off, they'll probably get sick because the body needs that time. So do you suggest supplements, minerals, vitamins to actually help people through stress?
I do think always that our food is the foundation of our health. So it's not taking supplements and then still eating junk food and the quick fixes. They're supplementary to our diet. So it is thinking about choices we make on a day-to-day basis, and how even 80% of the time, whether we could make different choices, even though there might be the odd blips going on. But yes, there are certain nutrients that actually cushion our body against stress, and ironically some of them get used up more, like magnesium, under stress. So we actually need more of them, and they do come in our whole foods and our fruit and vegetables. But of course, then if people are not eating those, so we think of things like the B vitamins, particularly B5. And magnesium is nature's tranquilizer. It's such a calming mineral, and it also, in terms of muscle as well, for those people where they have got a lot of muscle cramps and spasms and tremors. And there are some really good key nutrients like chromium, where somebody may be going for the comfort food. That stress response is either pushing them towards alcohol or cakes and biscuits, where it's literally leaving them stuck in that vicious circle. So, and there's an amino acid called L-theanine, which enables our brain to switch off, because a lot of people I see in clinic are tired but wired, excuse me, and even though they're exhausted, they can't shut their brain off to go to sleep at night, and everything's whirring round, and they're thinking about what they should have done and what they've got to do tomorrow, and are not getting that recuperating sleep that they actually need.
Oh, that's such a good point, isn't it? You get into bed and your mind's still going, excuse me, and going around. And for those of us who practice meditation, I mean, how do you get from busy beta into chilled out alpha theta when there's so much going on? If you've got nutritional support, as well as maybe some music that I'm going to play a little bit later, which I always think is a very good bridge, to kind of, so that you've got things on board to support you. You're not just constantly pushing yourself, because that's what stress is, isn't it? This constant pushing.
Yes, and I think if we've got things like the music and being able to be mindful and being able to still the body, using nutrients to support that as well, looking at the food we're eating, we're almost giving the body support in order to be able to do this and to cope the next day. And I think the sleep routine is important as well, about shutting off the mobiles, the blue light, about an hour before bed. Some people are much more susceptible to it. It is about trying to get our bodies, it's sleep hygiene, of being able to wind down like we would do with children, you know, read them a book, you have a routine, maybe a bath with lavender oil or whatever suits people, but we need a sleep routine to have this wind down in order for the brain to say, okay, I can switch off now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And also having a little notebook sometimes so that you can download what's coming through. I'm not going to forget it. I've written it down. Give yourself space. It's a reframe, and it's real sort of self-care and self-responsibility and self-kindness, you know.
Yes.
And
I think that's really important, that ability to look after ourselves, the self-nourishment as well. And I think sometimes people, especially women, are way down in this list of who else they're looking after. And really, I say to them, well, unless you're well and you're looking after yourself, who's going to look after all these others, like your elderly parents or your children and everything? There's nobody there going to support you. You've got to do it yourself.
Absolutely have. And nice cup of tea is always quite handy, isn't it?
I've got one, yes. I've got a lemon and ginger.
Okay.
What have you got?
I've got my Supreme Matcha Green.
I'll keep you going. But people could use a lovely chamomile.
Yes.
About an hour before bed to help with this wind down. It does work well on the nervous system, definitely.
It does. So there's herbs that you can use in a prescriptive manner, and it's finding your favorites. It's something you can associate with it. Like you said, the lavender fragrance, such a great balancer. It's not just about sleep, it's about balancing you throughout the day, but it's certainly the one that I use at night. Definitely. So just before we go into what's happening in London very soon with you, I'd just like to talk a little bit about this fat in the middle, because I've got a lot of friends of mine, and myself included, that's got a little bit of a tummy going on, and no matter what you seem to do, it seemed to stay there. Now, I know that it's healthy for women to have bellies, don't get me wrong, but when you're associating it with stress, I was like really fascinated by that. Could you explain that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, because fat around the middle, and I ended up writing a book about it because it was so common, and it's usually more of a male pattern of weight gain. It has been unusual for us as women to gain weight around the middle, because we're usually sort of this pear-shaped Marilyn Monroe hourglass figure. So we are, though, losing our waist, but it is more of a male pattern of weight gain. But the difficulty with fat around the middle is it's a different kind of fat to fat around the hips. It's metabolically active. It produces estrogen, it produces inflammatory substances, it can raise blood pressure. So the difficulty with it is it can increase our risk of certain illnesses into the future because it's very metabolically active. Now, it's actually being laid down by that stress hormone cortisol that comes out with adrenaline. So adrenaline gets us alert and focused, and cortisol is the hormone that releases fat and sugar into the blood at the time of that crisis in order to give us the energy to run or fight. But again, if we're stuck in this office, we're stuck in this traffic jam, that fat and sugar have been released and it's going nowhere in terms of energy. So the body lays it down around the middle because it's close to our liver and our major arteries, and it can get at that fat store quickly because it perceives that it might be needed because this stress response is still there. It's like it perceives an ongoing battle and it's storing it there actively close so it can get at it quickly. Too far away down at the hips. So in a way, you can see how intelligent our bodies are, but it runs like a gland on its own. It's not sitting there doing nothing, and it's pumping out all these substances and chemical messengers which are not good for our health. So it is important to look at, and make sure we're not laying on too much weight around the middle. And it is a sign of being too stressed. It is.
Wow. Thank you. So a whole book on this, if you want to
yes.
catch up with the range of books. I love that a lot of your books start with natural solutions.
Yes, I'm very passionate about that. I know some people may need medication But I'm always offering the natural solution, which can either sometimes be used alongside a medication, like if couples are going for fertility treatment and doing IVF, they can put the natural remedies in as well. Or it may be a woman going through the menopause, doesn't want to take HRT, maybe she can't because of a history of breast cancer, and then what solutions are available to her. And when we look at it, nature does give us a lot. It gives us a huge amount of possibilities and solutions that are there across many cultures and different traditions that we have access to now. Some are going to work better for some people more than others, but they do work, and it is just getting the right ones and knowing what is going to be the best depending on what the health concern is.
So is what you are researching more and more, is what the natural solutions are for people?
Yes, and the last book I did was on dementia and Alzheimer's, because frighteningly now, Alzheimer's is the biggest killer for women. It's overtaken everything else. But when you look at the research, it is amazing on what has been looked at in terms of omega-3s and the way we should be eating, physical activity, all of that. And yet it does require doing a number of things, like thinking about physical, emotional, nutritional. It's us as a whole person, whereas pharmaceutically, they're looking for a magic bullet. And there hasn't been a new one for dementia in 15 years, but there isn't a one solution. It does require also, I suppose you'd call it multifactorial, because that's how the body works. We need that physical side, emotional, feeding ourselves well. But when you put it all together, and I've put 7 steps in the dementia book, it is amazing of what can be done and where the research has gone in terms of the natural solutions. But it's encouraging, really. It's just getting it out to people for them to know that there are ways they can help themselves.
Oh, that is so key. Ways that you can help yourself.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it is that, as to whether people are happy to take responsibility. There may be a bit of effort at first, but I have to say what it gives us in terms of, now we talk about, we've always talked about lifespan, but we want health span. We want this quantity, but we want the quality, and what we can do physically and mentally. And we know the evidence is there now. It's so powerful and actually so helpful and beneficial to know that it's there and what we can do.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So become your own expert, but research the experts like yourself, Dr. Marilyn Glenville, here on She Time. There is new research coming through all the time, of course. And it's keeping up and sort of cross-referencing with what is actually real and true, and all the testing that goes on.
Yeah, and it is exciting as well. It's exciting to see that research. But for me, what I'm always aiming to do is to put it in a language, even with talks that I do, that mean that everybody can pick it up and do something with it. It's no good if this evidence stays in the medical literature and nobody gets to read it. It's stuck in the ivory tower and it's in a language that's not accessible. But it can be made into things that are really practical. It's just taking it from something that's very academic and saying, okay, what worked? How can we use that in our daily life? And what can we do that's really practical and can make a difference? And I think that's so exciting about taking something that stayed in that academic world and then making it into ways that all of us can use to benefit our health.
Absolutely. I concur. And isn't it going to be like International Stress Awareness Week coming up November the 4th to the 8th?
It is, yes. And I'm wonderful that awareness is being put out there about it for young and old and everybody, men and women, who are feeling the pressures of everyday life, which I know everybody isn't juggling all the balls up in the air and try and make sure none of them are dropping down.
You know, and it's being able to talk about it and not feel like you're making excuses or you're complaining, but sometimes just being able to speak out. Like, I've got all this juggling going on. I've got spinning plates. Those are mine. But, you know, and if you can just share it with someone, it kind of helps you share the in the intensity. Again, it's a bit like shaking out when you can write it out or speak it out and share it with another.
Yes.
Not only is it coming out of you, but also you can then sort of share it information, and what someone finds out, you then might be able to help with yourself. So
Yes.
this is going to be a very interesting week where you can actually talk about stress and not feel embarrassed. I think that would be good.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. It's really brilliant to have a week like that. Definitely.
Yeah. And then you are doing a fantastic day in central London on the 23rd of November.
On the 23rd of November, on how to overcome stress and anxiety in your daily life naturally. And yes, I'll be going through all the different tips. We can now test for stress as well. So I'll be talking about how, yes, we can test how stressed somebody is, and whether they're moving from this, what we call stage 2 to the stage 3, which is this adrenal exhaustion and adrenal fatigue. So we can pick it up much earlier to stop somebody tipping over. But I'm going to go through that, all the vitamins and minerals, what we can do with our diet, the sleep side of it, all of those different aspects. And I'm also going to be joined by 2 wonderful people. One of them is Dame Kelly Holmes, the Olympian gold medalist, and she's coming in. She's so inspirational, talking about how she's overcome pressures and depression and everything like that. And then Helen Ford is also joining me. She's my senior nutritionist at the Glenville Nutrition Clinic, and she's going to do a live cooking demonstration of how all these different snacks we talked about that people could make very simply and then have them to hand, and just know that certain foods are actually going to help calm them down, are going to manage that external stress from outside. So everybody's welcome to come. It'll be a lovely day, plenty of time for questions for myself, Dame Kelly Holmes, for Helen, for all of us during that day, and to talk to other experts that are there as well.
And you can get access to that on your website, marilynglenville.com.
Yes.
Is that /events?
Yes,
And
or they can go onto my website, marilynglenville.com, and download a free ebook on 7 common mistakes that people might be making. And then I'm going to send them an email, because I thought it'd be lovely to give a gift today for doing this on UK Health Radio for a special ticket price for the event.
oh,
So if they go through and download the ebook, and then they'll get an email from me about a different ticket price for them. It was just nice to give something back for today.
Oh, thank you so much. Really,
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate
You're welcome.
that. And let's get a load of people coming along. Central London, as I say, so it's easy to get to wherever you are.
Yes, 23rd of November, and come for the whole day. So lots of things to look at, and snacks and that, to see how they're made very quickly. And just to spend the time with myself and Dame Kelly Holmes, it would be very inspirational, but with lots of practical tips for people to take away that they can start putting into place straight away. Really easy, simple things that could transform their life, definitely.
Wonderful, wonderful. Is there just one thing, one tip that you could leave us with before we go, Dr. Marilyn? Is there something?
I would have to say I'm going back to reading the labels, and I know it's small print, but it is this added sugar that is tipping the blood sugar roller coaster, which then causes the adrenal glands to respond to our pattern of eating. And it is, unfortunately, in everything nowadays. And I would suggest there are now alternatives, very much alternatives on the shelf or in their independent health food shop, and they just swap it out. And these small changes, they can feel the difference fairly quickly over time by reducing that quick fix effect on that blood sugar response, which will stop the adrenal glands being stimulated by this roller coaster of blood sugar.
I got you. So white sugar really is poison toxicity.
White sugar, and also the white refined carbohydrates, not so good, like the white bread, the white flour, but the white sugar is an even quicker response. And you mix that with a cake and a biscuit, you've got the white flour in there as well. So a bit of a double whammy going on, unfortunately.
Not actually a treat then, is it?
No, it's not. It might seem like it, but it's not, in terms of, it might be a short-term one, but it's not a long-term treat for the body anyway.
Reframing what a treat means for you then.
I think it is, and thinking about, like you said, it is about nourishing ourselves, of actually saying, how do we look after this vehicle, because it's the only one we've got? How do we take care of it and put ourselves up in the priorities of how we're going to nourish ourselves emotionally, physically, like you with the exercise and the qigong, all of the other things we can put into place to take care of ourselves, because nobody else may be taking care of us if we're taking care of a lot of other people as well. Yeah, we
do have to take care. Well, thank you so much for taking care of yourself and sharing your wonderful gifts with us. I really appreciate your time here with us on Chi Time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clara. It's been lovely to spend the time with you.
Yeah, it'll be good to see you on the 23rd as well. I'm coming up from Somerset. I'm going to be there.
See you then.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for listening and watching.